It was only a couple of weeks ago that Donald Trump's supporters told us not to believe our lying ears when Donald Trump said this.
We're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars if I get elected. Now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars.
Relax. He wasn't talking about a bloodbath. He was just talking about a bloodbath for the country involving the auto industry. Trump's allies told us that. Political analysts told us that. Heck, even some journalists told us that. Okay, so Trump was referring to cars yesterday, or was he? In Michigan, when he spoke at a lectern bearing the words, "Stop Biden's border bloodbath." It was during those remarks that Trump claimed he spoke with the family of a murder victim named Ruby Garcia, a 25-year-old woman who was allegedly killed by an undocumented immigrant. Except he didn't. He did not speak with any of us, Ruby's sister Marvi Garcia said in an interview. So it's kind of shocking seeing that he had said he had spoken with us, misinforming people on live TV, end quote. NBC News reports when asked to confirm if Trump had indeed spoken with a member of Ruby Garcia's family, the Trump campaign declined to comment on the record. Now, this specific deception feeds into the violent, dehumanizing way that Trump uses the issue of immigration to try to terrorize his way back to the Oval Office. Trump wants you to believe that we live in a violent, treacherous nation where his political rivals are vermin, and he alone, as he says it, stands between you and an invasion of animals, also his words, at the border. This playbook is tried and true the world over. It depends on people not reading history and knowing that this dupe has been tried and has worked masterfully before. But forget about history for the moment. Let's just rewind to what Trump said about immigrants in this country in December.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country.
Now, you've heard plenty of people tell you that Trump was echoing the words of Adolf Hitler there. Maybe you don't believe that. Maybe you don't think he really did that. Maybe you think it's just a coincidence that Trump used the phrase poisoning the blood of our country, but none of that would be true. For educational purposes, the University of Oklahoma has available online an English language translation of the 11th chapter of Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. Remember now, Trump said people immigrating into the United States were poisoning the blood of our country. In Chapter 11 of Mein Kampf, a chapter titled Nation and Race, Hitler wrote, quote, "All great cultures of the past perished only because the originally creative race died out from blood poisoning." In a softball right-wing radio interview, Trump was confronted about this, and he said, quote, "I never knew that Hitler said it. I know nothing about Hitler. I'm not a student of Hitler. I never read his works," end quote. Never read his works. Now, remember that Trump has not shied away from saying great things about other autocrats and strongmen. He said Hungary's despotic leader, Viktor Orban, is fantastic. He called North Korea's murderous dictator, Kim Jong-un, very honorable. Trump threw the entire Western alliance into a tailspin when, as president of the United States of America, he denigrated the work of his own intelligence community and parroted Vladimir Putin's criticisms of the United States. America's decades-long subjection to Donald Trump is littered with hateful and violent words and actions. Donald Trump has refused still to apologize for taking out full-page newspaper ads in 4 New York City newspapers in 1989, calling for the death penalty for the Central Park Five black and Latino men who were wrongfully convicted as teenagers for the rape of the New York City jogger. As a candidate in 2016, Donald Trump said he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. In that same campaign, he promised to pay the legal bills of any of his supporters who beat up protesters at his rallies. On his inauguration day, he gave a dystopian and ominous speech invoking the phrase American carnage. As president, Donald Trump said there were, quote, very fine people on both sides, end quote, after an innocent woman was murdered in Charlottesville, Virginia, during a riot between demonstrators and neo-Nazis. The night before that deadly riot, those same white supremacists marched through the campus of the University of Virginia with torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and "blood and soil," which is an English translation of a Nazi slogan. At a presidential debate in 2020 against Joe Biden, Donald Trump, as president, told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. At his rallies, Donald Trump is calling those jailed for the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol patriots. Those imprisoned are hostages. The same people who pledged to hang Mike Pence, who repeatedly assaulted and threatened to kill Capitol police officers, who built a gallows with a noose outside the Capitol building and desecrated the halls of Congress. Today, a federal judge sentencing a man convicted of assaulting law enforcement said, "We cannot condone the normalization of the January 6th U.S. Capitol riot." But condone that violence is exactly what Donald Trump and the Republican Party are doing. This week, Donald Trump, the presidential nominee of the party of Abraham Lincoln, had to be gagged by a New York judge after making threatening attacks against the judge's daughter. Here's the thing. Violence is who Donald Trump is. He uses violent words, wielding them like weapons in his effort to hold on to power and make you afraid of him, of the others, of the immigrants. It doesn't matter as long as you are afraid. But it doesn't have to be this way. You shouldn't give over your fear to Donald Trump, but you also can't ignore him. He counts on the fact that some will follow him into the fire of his creation, but most will look away in horror, hoping time will make it all go away. Time will not make it all go away. Throughout this nation's history, many wise Americans have offered wisdom in the face of political violence.
And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people who will bomb a church in Birmingham, Alabama, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, "Wait on time." Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability.
Human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. In other words, things don't get better for those who wait. Things only get better for those who act. Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.